Expert mode is coming to Pokemon Sleep. Who would have thought? Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. Today we're going to talk about the update involving some changes in the game, but also talk about expert mode and why it's worth preparing for the expert mode ahead of time and what you can do to prepare for it. Granted, we don't actually know everything about expert mode because there's not enough information given in this update, but there are some things we can guess and prepare for. First, let's take a look at some of the changes coming to Pokemon Sleep in update 2.9.0. In the upcoming maintenance, we'll be getting the event information injected into the game for Packed Portions Cooking Week. I'll be covering this in a separate video, so make sure you subscribe. A number of great game changes are coming, things that actually make the game easier to play. The first is that 3-star sleep styles will be more likely to appear. That generally means quicker dex progression for everyone, and newer players will be able to reach their dex goals a bit sooner. Additional 3-star sleep styles are injected into Greengrass Isle. If you didn't already know, Greengrass Isle normally are missing 3-star styles for a lot of Pokemon. It generally contains 1, 2, or 4 stars, but occasionally they do add some 3 stars into Greengrass. It's just a good way for developers to make sure that people move on from Greengrass, but I guess if you want to stay in Greengrass, this is good news for you. But I also know some players who just enjoy Greengrass because of its randomness, so this is good news for you. This is amazing news for ingredient specialists and relatively good news for skill specialists, not so important for berry specialists. From now on, you're no longer penalized for catching a Pokemon fully evolved from an inventory perspective. Typically, when you evolve a Pokemon, each time you evolve, you get 5 additional inventory. But if you catch it fully evolved, so let's say a Blastoise, then you have 10 less inventory than a Squirtle that evolved fully into a Blastoise. This is amazing for players who encounter shiny Pokemon fully evolved because sometimes we avoid catching fully evolved Pokemon to avoid this inventory problem. And shinies are a guaranteed catch anyway. So ingredient specialists are less harmed by being caught fully evolved. Of course, this doesn't affect the skill level problem for not evolving. Less of an issue for ingredient specialists who don't really focus on main skills anyway, still a big issue for skill specialists. But even skill specialists would benefit from not being penalized for the inventory because having bigger inventory, especially overnight, you'll have a greater chance to trigger in the morning. Because when an inventory is filled, the Pokemon can no longer trigger a skill. This is just a well-known fact in Pokemon Sleep since the start of the game. Newer players may not know that. If you're not sure how this works, just ask us in the comments section below. We'll try to help you. It doesn't really affect berry specialists that much. Sometimes we even like berry specialists to reach full inventory quicker so that they can sneaky snack, because sneaky snacking guarantees that every production is berry output, which is quite powerful for a berry specialist to do. Is it harmful? Look, it's probably not harmful. Sometimes those ingredients are useful, especially if they match the recipe. But otherwise, you can still use them as excess ingredients anyway, so it's not greatly harmful to berry specialists. And in addition, some berry specialists have good skills. Having that inventory just gives a better chance to trigger. But once again, you still lose the skill level if you don't have it evolving from the base form. Meaning that the main challenge of catching something more evolved from now on is main skill seed. Although there is an argument for catching base Pokemon anyway, because generally speaking it's going to be cheaper, you're going to raise the friendship level quicker, you're going to guarantee some of those great gold skills like helping bonus for berry specialists, maybe berry finding, etc. So this isn't saying go and spend all your great biscuits catching a Charizard, it's still just generally a bit safer and you're going to progress quicker if you catch something in the base form like a Charmander. Great news for the underdogs, Butterfree, Dodrio, and Altaria all getting a slight buff to their speed, having their frequency slightly shortened. Some people are speculating the next island might be dropping soon, well, because Bugberry and Dragonberries haven't been made into favorites yet in any island. But maybe partially this is to do with the expert mode, which we're talking about next. There's some quality of life improvements, I won't go into detail here. And now onto the juiciest part of this video. Expert Mode. What is it, and what are my tips to preparing for the release of Expert Mode? Around the end of July or maybe early August, we're going to get this new mode where it's going to be harder to raise Snorlax, where it's going to be harder to get certain sleep styles, where it's just generally going to cost you more drowsy power to do the same things as before, but you're supposed to get more rewards for it. The developer's tip is prepare for Expert Mode by befriending and raising many kinds of Pokemon. But my tips are a bit more specific than that, which I'll explain in a moment. Now, to even unlock Expert Mode, you need to have at least made Master 18 at Greengrass Isle, and currently Expert Mode will only be available for Greengrass Isle. We don't know if it will be available in other islands yet. I'm guessing right now it just makes sense on Greengrass because you'll see in a moment that Expert Mode will be a random selection of berries, which only happens at Greengrass. But Master 18 is not the only thing you need. You will also need an expert ticket, and you can get it by using your sleep points. Here's to hoping that the Expert Mode ticket will be 100 sleep points, just like the Easy Travel ticket, but I highly doubt it. If I were to guess, my expectation is something like 500 to 1,000 sleep points to get one expert ticket. And if it's going to be costly, we gotta make sure we prepare well ahead of time, because actually you're not guaranteed to have better rewards by doing Expert Mode. By the sound of the information provided, let's take a look at what actually happens in Expert Mode. When you go to Greengrass and you use your expert ticket, Snorlax as usual will roll 3 favorite berries, but one of them will be the main favorite and there'll be 2 sub favorites. And Pokemon that do the main favorite berry will have even greater effects, what they call helping related bonuses. Maybe how many berries are farmed, or maybe how quickly they're farmed. Those Pokemon that do the main favorite berry will do it better. It doesn't really say anything about the sub favorites, so maybe nothing really happens. Maybe you still just get the 2 times berry strength per berry, but you don't get any extra bonuses and you don't get any penalties for it. So this brings up my first tip. Make sure you try to have as much berry coverage as possible. I'm talking 1 for every berry typing. Look at your berry specialist list and look at your berry coverage. Do you have 1 berry specialist, a good one, maybe something with berry finding, helping bonus, helping speed, speed of help up? Do you have 1 to cover every berry typing? Because if you show up to an expert mode and the main favorite berry is poison berry and you don't have an Arbok, well, you're really going to miss out on that extra helping bonus. We don't know how much more bonus there will be. Of course, if it's only a small bonus, then it doesn't really matter. We can still use the 2 sub favorite berries, but if we were to assume that it's going to be a huge increase, you got to make sure that you've got every berry typing covered. I've personally got most berries covered. I'm still looking for is Psychic and Fairy for me, but I do have a berry finding Wigglytuff, but maybe I will go and hunt for a Clefable and a Munna after all, just in preparation. So this might just be something I should do before the release of Expert Mode. For those of you who don't have much berries covered yet and you kind of have to split your resources, like your biscuits, when catching Pokemon, and you're not really keen on catching something like Munna or Cleffa because their berry strength is just not that great unless their favorite berry, so they're not really great for general usage. I totally understand, but maybe you're not quite ready for expert mode and I don't want you to waste your sleep points exchanging for a ticket that you're not going to get any rewards for. In fact, if you don't use Pokemon with the favorite berry, you'll actually receive penalties. Speculation is that penalties will be that Pokemon that don't farm any favorite berries will have reduced helping stats like speed or amount. And then there'll be one additional bonus relating to how Snorlax will be raised, but it's a random effect every week. So this is a bit cryptic. I don't really know what that means yet. It'll be interesting because if they add something like a special quirk that gives additional bonuses, like if a Pokemon has a certain skill, then they will be even faster in their farming. That'll make the game a lot more interesting in how we'll form our teams every week. So one of the problems of being penalized for not having favorite berries is ingredient specialist. Up to this point, we don't actually care about the berries that are produced by your ingredient specialist. We mainly want to make sure the ingredients it produces, which is mainly what they do, give you enough to cook your dishes. That's what we want ingredient specialists to do. And the best types of ingredient specialists are the ones that only give you exactly what you need every time you cook a dish. So a mono ingredient specialist, for example. But each Pokemon can only be mono in one ingredient. Let's take Charizard for example. If you're looking at cooking Defiant Coffee Dress Salad and you need 28 sausages, normally Charizard is the way to go, or Aggron if that's what you use. Something with just sausages so that you guarantee to get that recipe bonus. Generally speaking, it's just worth a lot more to match the recipe than to use ingredients as excess ingredients, which is why mono ingredient is so powerful. But during an expert mode week, if Fire Berry is not what your favorite berries are, not even the sub-favorite berries, well then what would you do? Because you need to cook that salad. Well, you've got a few options. You can maybe cook a different dish, something that you can actually farm ingredients on with what you have available. But with only 3 berry typing that are actually going to match favorite berries, immediately our ingredient coverage with 18 different berry typings in the game, with only 3 berry typings chosen every expert week, our ingredient coverage approximately became 1/5 as strong as what they used to be. According to the developers, they'll be penalized, but we don't actually know how much penalty there will be. If your mono ingredient cover actually happens to match the correct favorite berry typing and the dish you need to cook, then it is the most powerful that it can be. But let's say that's not true, because most likely that won't be true. Your alternative options are you can use, say, another Pokemon like Aggron, because it's a steel type, not a fire type. But that might mean you need to invest 2 different Pokemon for the same ingredient, which is a relatively costly exercise. Alternatively, you can look through all the Pokemon that do sausages at the level 30 slot. So here I'm on Rainanex calculator, I'm filtering for ingredient specialists that do sausages and I'm setting them to level 30 and fully evolved. How about a Toxicroak that does oil sausage? That could be a viable option if Poison Berry is the favorite berry of the week. But of course that assumes that you haven't already invested in a Toxicroak for, say, mono oil. So whatever redundant Pokemon you have for an ingredient, you can now start looking into the semi-mono option. Semi-mono meaning the second and third ingredients are matching instead of the first. But that's still an investment to level 60, although it is still an option. So let's say I've already got a Cramorant that does mono oil, then I don't really need a Toxicroak to do oil. It may be worth investing in a Toxicroak that is semi-mono just for the expert week. Unfortunately though, every time a new expert week comes along, you might have to look for another ingredient specialist that has an ABB ingredient list where the B is what you need. And just to give you another example, if you happen to land Fire Berry for the expert week and you need ginger for Zing Zap Spice Cola, but you don't really need sausage because desserts don't really use sausage, then a Charizard with an ABB ingredient list at level 60 would be the strongest candidate in this sense. But it is a good time to check what other options there are using the calculator. So again, I'm going to filter for ingredients, ginger, final evolution, and I'm going to set it to level 30 because I want to know what farms ginger at level 30. And here are 4 options. We've got Comfey, we've got Charizard, Tyranitar, or Kangaskhan. If it happens that Fire Berry is the only one matching favorite berry out of these 4, then that is the only option I have. Then I might need to consider raising a Charizard to level 30 or 60 just for this week, which seems like a relatively costly exercise. But even just raising it to level 30 just to unlock that level 30 ingredient could be a temporary option just for an expert mode week. Although we really have to question, is the penalty on an invested Tyranitar that's level 60 going to be great enough to actually lose out to a non-mono Charizard? A Charizard that only farms 4 ginger at level 30 because that's all the resources you have to invest on it, compared to a Tyranitar that you've invested to level 60 with mono ginger. How much of a penalty are we talking about for it to be worth switching to a new Charizard at level 30. So we don't know the exact numbers yet, but it will be very hard to penalize a Tyranitar enough to make it worse than a Charizard in Ginger farming and a Charizard only at level 30. So it's worth considering how much of a penalty we're talking about. Otherwise, mono ingredient is still the way to go, even if you're penalized, just to avoid having to raise other Pokemon that you don't really want to level 30 or even level 60. But as usual, we have other ways to get around that as well. You can prepare ingredients ahead of time, although some people speculate that maybe in expert week, we have to start with 0 ingredients. We have to refresh everything. Can we actually overstack our berries or ingredients using our legendaries like Raikou, Suicune, or Entei, or expand pot into a new week? Are these going to be allowed? If so, prepare your ingredients ahead of time so that you don't have to worry about matching the favorite berry and the dishes with your ingredients. But don't forget that you've got your berry specialists that actually do ingredients too. I chose Fireberry for a good reason, because it happens that Typhlosion can give you a lot of gingers if you've got that ingredient list. And for a Fireberry expert week, Typhlosion would be the main candidate for berries anyway. So Typhlosion for a Fireberry week where you also need ginger, say for Zing Zap Spice Cola, it's going to be exceptionally powerful. And while we're on the topic of Fireberry, I don't know if you've noticed, but the focus of a single super favorite berry sounds kind of familiar. Legendary Pokemon skills tend to be skills that kind of require you to build a mono berry team. So if you happen to have a super favorite Fireberry for the expert week, Entei is extra powerful, especially if the entire team is Fireberries or if more of the team is Fireberries. How about Darkrai? If you get a dark main favorite berry, it's going to make the design of mono berry teams, or at least close to mono berries, more powerful. Again, how much more powerful we don't know yet because, well, we don't have the numbers. We could go on and on about this topic of ingredient build for ingredient specialists in expert weeks, but we're not going to because it's too complex without actually knowing the numbers. I'm just going to leave you with, if you catch a non-mono ingredient specialist and it has really good stats, ideally it's ABB. So again, for Charizard, it will be Sausage, Ginger, Ginger, just to reduce the randomness of your drops. Well then, don't throw it out just yet. This semi-mono build could come in handy for an expert week. Even if it's going to be costly, you may find it useful. However, it is probably still worth just making sure that you've got one ingredient specialist for every ingredient, eventually at level 60 that is mono ingredient, because that is still the king for every other week that's not expert mode. So that still comes as a priority, but don't go and throw away these ABB options. ABC options like Charizard's Sausage, Ginger, Herb is still going to be the worst ingredient list. Look, even if you match favorite berry, unless you happen to have all 3 ingredients in the same recipe that you need, it's just too much randomness. Only 1 in 3 drops will be the right ingredient that you need, and if it's sausage that you need, or if it's ginger that you need, you're going to get less. You really hope that the thing that you actually need is herbs, because that's the one that drops the most when it does drop. It's not an equal split in their drops. So ABC will then focus on herbs and you have to raise it to level 60. It just overall doesn't make sense and you're really never going to use it outside of an expert week. So that once again, the goal is 1 mono ingredient for each ingredient to make sure you've got everything covered. And then for every species, hold on to something that's semi-mono like this, like an ABB Charizard, in case you need it for an expert week. Ideally, you don't invest it until you really need it in the moment for the expert week. And even better if it's a different species altogether, so you don't have to use the same resources fighting over Charmander candies for both Charizard that you now have to invest in. Now, why do we want to do expert mode? It sounds like a lot of headache. Not only that, it's actually harder to get sleep styles. The amount of drowsy power you need is going to be greatly increased for each sleep style. So aren't you going to get less rewards? And I think it will be unless you play expert mode really well. and actually utilize the favorite berries very well. If you don't and you get just the same drowsy power as you would normally, then it's actually going to be harder for you to get the same sleep styles and you're going to get less rewards. What they're saying though is that for the same sleep style that you do get, you're going to get more research EXP, dream shards and candy. So there's some balancing act here. It could be more, it could be less resources and rewards depending on how well you play the expert mode. But other reasons that you want to do expert mode is an increased chance to get shiny Pokemon, which is great. It means a cheaper catch. You only have to spend 1 Poké Biscuit to get a shiny Pokemon, but also it's just a bit of a flex. There will also be expert mode exclusive weekly missions, and Pokemon that don't normally appear in Greengrass can spawn there too during expert mode. So I guess it's good news for people who are hunting specific Pokemon that aren't available at Greengrass to go to Greengrass for expert mode if they're up for the challenge, because you could still find that Pokemon there. So while this statement is rewards that you can get from expert mode, it sounds like bonuses of running expert mode. There can be some penalties and harm to running expert mode. Not only does it cost you the sleep points to get the ticket, you could actually get less resources if your drowsy power is just really bad because you don't have the right matching favorite berries, and actually most of the time you're actually penalized for running non-favorite berries. Anyway, that's all speculation. I'll probably have to make another video once this mode is actually released. So make sure you like and subscribe to my channel, and if you want to see me and Piggy compare our accounts for expert mode, comparing a free to play to a pay to play player, how well you can actually do in expert mode and that sort of difference between the two accounts, let us know in the comment section below.